Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Azeem Digital Asks all-round digital marketing podcast. We are flying through season 6 now and very much on the road to episode 100. And I'm super excited to have my guest on the show, Mike King, an absolute legend in this industry. Someone who, although we've probably done 2 million conferences between us, of which 1.9 million, 1.9 million Mike's done. We've never actually met in person, which we'll fix later this year. But Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Azeem. I'm excited to be here.
So full disclosure for the listeners and viewers, the episode is titled, Google leaks, since the dust has settled, what has changed? But I did say to Mike before we started recording, we can talk about this stuff or we can just chop it up and talk about all the shit that he wants to talk about. I was worried about swearing then, but it's my podcast. I can say what the fuck I want.
Yeah, so exactly.
But yeah, look, I'm going to start off, we'll start off talking about the leaks and then see where we go. But as a hook, right, because you've done 40 billion podcasts, I'm going to put you on the spot right now. What's one thing about you that people don't know that you've never shared on a podcast before?
I got booed off stage at a Criss Cross concert. You remember Criss Cross, the rap group? Yeah. Nah, I was like 11 or 12, and I went to this concert, and there's a guy named Ed Lover. He's like a famous host from New York radio from like the 80s, early 90s, and he was the host of the concert. So it was Criss Cross and Farside open for them, and so Farside rocks. And then, Criss Cross doesn't come on. So Ed Lover's like, yo, let's have a talent contest. And another thing people don't know about me is as a child, whenever I would go to some event and they would pick out people from the crowd, I would always get picked. I don't know why, but I would always get picked. Like, this happened when I went to Nickelodeon and Disney. I would always get picked. So in this case, I got picked, but if you don't know, I rap, but this was before I rap. I didn't start rhyming until I was 14, and this was me at 11. And so this woman gets up and she dances, and then they get to me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm a rap. But I didn't have any raps, and I didn't know how to freestyle. So I'm just mumbling on the mic, and then they're just like, boo, boo. And then the guy after me actually could rap, and so because of how bad I was, he seemed even more awesome. And so he won the talent contest, and I was so upset and embarrassed and crying. And yeah, I've never told that story before on a podcast.
Amazing. Now I can say I've got a Mike King exclusive, so that will be the hook for the show. But yeah, man, look, it's a real pleasure to have you on. And in that same vein, fast forward to these leaks. I mean, you've talked about them on millions of podcasts. What's one thing about the leaks that you haven't shared with anybody else that you think people should know about? Bearing in mind they've been out for a while now.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything I can share that because I feel like so many other people have mined it in different ways and they've come up with things and so on. But I will say that for me, the most important thing that I'm taking away from this is that user experience and SEO need to work hand in hand. And, I think that smart SEOs were always like, hey, user experience matters. But it was always hard to get buy-in for that because it's no, that's not SEO. That's a different discipline or whatever. And I think that you have to be focused on that, right? Because user experience is what encourages users to do the things that Google is ultimately measuring to determine whether or not a session was successful, right? So in SEO, we're like, hey, let's drown this page in text and write about your grandmother's life story and how she ultimately ended up making apple pies. And the person just wants the recipe, right? And so, the more that we can structure these pages where, yes, we do got to get that text on there, but it's easier for users to get to what they want, there's going to be a higher likelihood that they're going to have a more successful session, and then Google is ultimately going to keep you in those positions. And then I think that another thing that needs to change kind of industry-wide is our approach to link building. I think everyone looks at it from a volume perspective, which makes sense for a business. Like, the more links you build, the more money you make. But there's so much information that indicates, like, yo, they are not looking at the volume of links. Like, the volume was the way that you got over the fact that your quality was so terrible. And so, you know, being that there's the measures called source type, where they talk about where in the levels of the index that links live. And so it's like, you know, the highest tier is the pages that get accessed the most. So the ones that get accessed the most are the ones that are driving the most traffic, the ones that have the best rankings. And so historically, we've all been like, oh, what's the DA? What's the citation flow and whatever? But those things don't necessarily align with where that piece of content will live in the index, because it may be a page that no one ever looks at. So the whole point here is that we really got to focus on quality for real, and quality is measurable through an understanding of how does this stuff perform in Google. So again, quality over quantity from a link building perspective. And then my last thing has to do with how related content is to other content on your sites. So we talk about EEAT in our space, but that's always been kind of like ambiguous how you measure that. You get a lot of understanding of how Google might be looking at that by understanding vector embeddings. So vector embeddings are basically how they convert your content into representations in multidimensional space. And so what Google does is they create an embedding on the site level, and then they compare every new page to the site level embedding. And so if it's too far from what the site is about, they're going to be like, well, this is just some random topic. This site isn't an expert on this, so there's no reason to rank it for this topic. So what that tells us is that you got to be really strategic about how you expand your content. You can't just like write about anything and expect to rank it.
No, I love that. And already a couple of minutes in, head exploded. Let's walk it back and just give me like a 30-second overview for the non-technical and broader marketing listeners. In short, what were these leaks? Why do you think they're important? And then I really want to pick your brains about following that, like day one when you got that email. But for now, for the broader listeners, what exactly are they and why are they important? Because I've seen different conversations about the value of them and whether it's worth it or not, but I'd love to hear it directly from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened was there was some documentation on the various features that Google measures as part of the ranking algorithm. And it's not just a ranking algorithm. There's also stuff in there for like YouTube and Google Assistant and a lot of the different things that make up Google's products. And so the best way to say it is it's the ingredients, not the recipe, right? Like, we don't know exactly how they're weighted, how Google is using them, but a lot of them have descriptions which indicate what they're for, right? And so you're right. There's a lot of people who are like, oh, we knew all this. There's nothing new in here. First of all, I don't agree with that. Second of all, there is value in verification and or validation that we got from that, because there's a lot of things in the SEO space that we believed, but we only had anecdotal evidence of. And so it was difficult to be like, okay, we always need to move this way as a result of it. And then the other thing is we get a lot more information about the various ways that Google can run their algorithm, right? So like when we think of the algorithm, we kind of think of it as one thing, like this giant equation that just runs to give us rankings. But there's so many different components of it that can run differently. And just to clarify, it's not a giant equation, it's a series of microservices. And so those microservices then add up based on different factors. So like whether it's, local search versus video search and image search, and also the personalization aspects, like where are you from? Where are you searching from? What have you looked at in the past? all of those things will impact how those microservices interact with each other to then ultimately produce a result. And so what we got in this documentation was a lot more detail on all of this as well. So I talked about how the index is like stratified in different ways. But again, that was something that we thought of as though like this giant box that you just put content into. Really, it's a series of different boxes that are structured in these ways based on how valuable the content is, and also how is that content positioned. So there's just a lot of nuance that we have a better understanding of, and it also helps us understand that like a lot of our best practices didn't really make sense to begin with, right? So as an example, typical best practice for a page title is like what, 60, 70 characters? There's actually nothing in this documentation to indicate that there is a character limitation for the page title. And, you know, so that best practice that we all operated from actually cut us off from different opportunities. Because what we found is when we test page titles that are longer than that, Google weighs everything in that. And so a keyword in the page title that doesn't visually display, you can still rank for. And so when we extend these page titles, we end up getting higher click-through rates, better rankings, and so on, because we're going beyond that best practice. So I think that we're getting a lot of opportunity to understand what are things that we can test to be better at what we do.
Love that. That's perfect. And I will pick your brains about things we can be better at and things that we can stop doing. Feel free to disagree, but I am absolutely of the opinion, and before I say it, I'll qualify this, that you've been in the industry much longer than me. You've seen much more stuff than me, and I've still got all of your hair, which I'm jealous about.
No, I don't.
I think, certainly when it comes to SEO, that we could have something that could be presented as like an absolute truth, and some SEOs would still find a way to say, no, that's incorrect, just because people like to go against the grain. That's my opinion. Like, feel free to say no, Azeem.
No, I agree with that. But I think the thing is, there are not many absolute truths in SEO because it's just such a dynamic environment. The way that Google operates, and again, we're getting more color as it relates to that by seeing the different things that Google is using and also how they can be used. So yeah, I don't think there are any absolute truths. There are absolutes in so far as like the architecture is a finite series of things, but again, because how it's used is so dynamic, it's difficult to be like, it is always this way.
Okay, fair. Let's go back to the day that you get this email, or the day that you become aware of these leaks. They've arrived in your lap. What were your first thoughts? Were you skeptical? If so, how skeptical were you? Just take me through your process, sort of this landing in your lap and being like, oh.
Yeah, I wasn't skeptical because it was Rand that brought it to me. You know, he was skeptical, but the thing is that over the last few years, I've been working on this book called The Science of SEO, and I've been doing a ton of research, reading white papers, patents, watching videos from people like Jeff Dean, like engineers at Google and so on. And so when Rand showed it to me, I recognized a lot of language that isn't like easily publicly available, right? And so I'm looking through it, I'm like, no, I think this is real, you know, and I was explaining to him why I thought it was real. And then I just felt like I've been training my whole career for this moment, right? Like all the things that I've learned, all the stuff, all the conversations I had with like Bill Slawski, like all that stuff prepared me for this moment right here. So I was just eagerly going through everything. And I also kind of subtweeted about it. I was like, yeah, I'm about to set SEO internet on fire, right? And then my guy, Dan Petrovic, he was like, wait, did you find this thing too? Because he had already had it, but he's just like keeping it to himself. So he had already had it for 3 weeks. and he had already started like making sense of it because there's a lot of documents to make sense of. And so, I was already like part way through it, but I'm just like, what's the meme with the guy where he's got like all the papers on the wall and he's like the conspiracy, like that's how I felt at that moment. But my friend here, Dan, he had already made sense of it, and so he shared with me a lot of the notes that he had so I could like ramp up on it a bit quicker. And so I was looking at all his stuff, I was reading through it, I was comparing it with all the stuff in my book. And then I was like, all right, cool. I'm ready to synthesize this in a way where I think like the SEO community can understand it. And so I basically did that over that weekend. And it was a holiday weekend here in the States, Memorial Day. And so I was ready to publish I'd gotten the documents from Rand on Friday. I was ready to publish on Monday. And I had also been going back and forth with Rand because Rand was working on his post. And I was like, yeah, here's some insight that you can use for yours. I'll use these insights for mine. And then we'll just like set this shit on fire, basically. And that's what we did.
Amazing. And you blew up SEO internet as you basically described it. What was one, you don't have to name names, of course, you can if you want to, but what was one unexpected thing that happened after you pressed publish? You might have read everything and thought, you know what, wow, this is going to change the game. But what one thing from the day of or the day after it, however long after, did you think, you know what, I wasn't ready for this, if there was one?
I don't think I expected as much of the skepticism that we got. Right? There was a lot of people like, oh, are these real? And like I knew they were real because I knew Dan had already turned it in and gotten a bug bounty from Google over it. And also I just knew they were real just from reading it, right? And so there's a lot of people that were very loud and wrong during this, right? Like they're just like, yeah, this can't be this way because of this, this, and this. I'm having the experience that I guess Googlers have every day, right? Where it's like, hey, I've told you everything, and you're still trying to say this isn't real. So that experience was not one I expected to have. And it's interesting because it was really a certain type of SEO that was like, this doesn't matter. And it was that same certain type of SEO that I typically don't agree with on a day-to-day basis. And so, yeah, it was very eye-opening that it made it definitive that there are certain people in our space that like I just never need to listen to again. Yeah.
So basically you just cut out the weeds pretty much.
Yeah.
I like that, which is good. Amazing. Based on what you've shared and what you've learned, and given that it's been a period of time since all this information has come out, what would you say is one thing that people doing SEO should stop doing immediately?
Yeah, again, the volume-based link building. If you're not building links from pages that drive traffic and rank themselves, you're wasting your time. Because those links are probably not being counted at all. Like there's so many different measures in there that talk about how they discount links that, when I pull people's link profiles, one of the things that I do is I pull the rankings of those pages. I also pull the traffic to those pages. And more often than not, most people's link profiles are like, 60+% of pages that are not valuable. So, being that like we've always focused on trying to drive higher quality links, when we look at the links that we've built for sites, they're all sites or all pages that have rankings and drive traffic. So it's like, it's pretty clear to me that there's no reason to be going after the like DA20 links that, no one on the web is actually looking to see. So yeah, I think that it's not realistic to expect that the industry will change because, again, the volume is how everyone makes money. But I think that if you are serious about driving results, you should change what you're doing strategically as it relates to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And my next question is certainly going to be, how do you think this has impacted, say, sections of our industry like digital PR over in the States? Because here in the UK, for example, there hasn't been to my knowledge, and I don't work in digital PR every day, I haven't seen a sort of step or direction change to that effect. Everything has kind of been business as usual. And I would have thought that with this level of information coming from like respected voices in the industry, I would have thought that the direction of that section of the industry certainly would have changed. Has it changed in the US? And if not, why do you think not?
So there was a lot of calling that into question in the last couple of years. Like people saying like, oh, digital PR doesn't work or whatever. I think the docs actually prove that it does, because digital PR typically yields links from, news sites. And news sites fall into a bucket that they call fresh docs. So pages that are like being updated quickly or coming out fast and like on sites that they're crawling every second. And so if you're getting links from the fresh doc section, your links are typically more valued than even the higher tier in the core index. So I think that, if anything, this has proven that digital PR is more valuable than we thought. But yeah, I haven't really seen anything change about that side of our space. I feel like that's the flashier side of our space. It's the people that are like, we do PR, when really you're just doing like fancy link building, but it is what it is, right? So yeah, I haven't seen much change there.
Yeah, no, love that. I just wanted to get your opinion on on that side of the industry. Let's talk about something that you do know a lot about: clicks, right? The documents, they talk about clicks at length.
Yep.
So for people watching this, what advice would you give them in terms of optimizing their websites or their clients' websites or whatever? How can they get people to stay longer?
Yeah. One, you got to make better metadata, right? Because one of the problems is that you are presenting something that doesn't align with the expectations of the user. So they click on it because they read your meta description or the snippet being used and your page title. And so they have an expectation of what is on the other side of that click. If you don't map to that expectation, you've already lost. And so I would recommend that people test their metadata a lot more than they probably are. And also try to get an understanding of like, what is the threshold of expectation for click-through rate? Because if you rank in, let's say, position 3 and you're getting a lower than average click-through rate there, you're probably going to lose that position anyway. So again, that metadata needs to be improved. Then once you do actually drive that click, get a better understanding of like, what are users doing once they get there? Like, are they rage quitting your page? Are they, scrolling up and down, can't find what they're looking for? Like, these are all indications that you don't have what they want. And so that's going to yield a signal back to Google that, this isn't the right result for this query. And so again, though, you'll end up getting demoted by that. But you've also got to get an understanding of like what a successful session might look like, right? Because just because someone clicks your page, clicks your result, comes to your page, and then bounces, does not necessarily mean that's an unsuccessful session. They may have found the information they were looking for, and then that's that. And so if they go back to Google and then they don't click on another result, that could be considered a successful session. But if they bounce from Google and then they click on another result and they stay there longer than they stayed on yours, that means yours wasn't successful. Or if they come back to Google and then reformulate the query and after only clicking on your result, that means it wasn't a successful session. But it also could be where, user does a query, clicks on your result, comes back, reformulates the query, you rank again, they click on your result again, then that could be 2 successful sessions. So it's a complicated way of understanding what session success is, but what you control is putting the right message in front of that user and then also making it so they can find what they're looking for as fast as possible. So again, this is primarily making sure you have a strong UX that allows them to find the information they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just thinking then while you were talking, surely I don't want to say it's a better option, obviously bowing to your superior knowledge, but wouldn't you want a user who's already on your page, rather than them going back to Google and reformulating the query, wouldn't you then want them to navigate through your website to maybe an adjacent or related page rather than going back? What is the better of the two options?
Absolutely.
Going back and reformulating, or staying on your website? What's the better option in your opinion?
The better option is to keep them on your website as long as possible, because that's considered what's called a long click. If a user doesn't go back to Google, that's a long click. And so Dan Petrovic, again, he back in the day, he had done this test where he hijacked the back button, and he made it so when you hit back, it went to something that looked like Google, but it wasn't actually Google. So the user thought they were going back to the results, but they weren't. And Google actually de-indexed his site, not just the test site that he had built, because this is something that just completely would destroy their nav boost signals if everyone did it. So I think this is why they came down on him so hard, because it's such an important signal for them. So I'm not saying hey, hijack the back button and send people somewhere else when they do that, even though I'm sure a bunch of black hat people will do exactly that. But the best outcome is for them to just stay on your site and not go back to Google.
Yeah, I love that, and I'll move on to NavBoost in a second. But there are news sites, typically news sites in the UK. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but let's say you arrive at an article and then you press back to go back to the SERP. Before you leave, you get a sort of interstitial or a different page. You've literally hit back, but it says before you leave, you might want to read this and this. Isn't that the same thing? And if not, how is it not?
So it depends how it's implemented, right? It may not be, them. It may not be them hijacking the back button. It may just be you click back and then they insert something, but you can still go back to Google. So I've seen situations where people just completely hijack the back button and you hit back and then you end up on, a different site or something like that, right? Like there's a lot of ways you can do it. But what you're describing may be an approach that is above board, because you're discouraging a user from going back to Google, and they may decide okay, I'm not going to go back to Google. I'm going to look at whatever else you got, right? It's just like any other situation where the exit intent pop-ups, right? Where you're hey, give me your email address before you go, or something like that. Those are all considered fine. It's not considered a dark pattern or anything like that. But it is a good approach to discourage someone from not being that long click. I don't think that it's something that Google can even reliably catch either, because they're not going to render every single page and then hit back coming from Google to see if you're hijacking the back button. So again, I think that's another reason why they don't want people knowing how effective that is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just sometimes I like to shit on news websites because the ones in the UK are just awful. Certainly.
But yeah, to your point though, or to your question, they definitely do that in the States.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, there are some in the UK. If you're ever in the UK during winter, just load up a news site on your phone, and the amount of stuff that pops up will just warm up your hands, and you'll be fine, because it's just ridiculous. But yeah, moving swiftly on. There's a couple of bits that I wanted to touch on with you. You mentioned NavBoost. For people listening and watching who might not know what that is, would you mind giving a short overview? And then when you do that, afterwards, share what people should do with that information once they know what it is.
Yeah, so NavBoost is what's called a twiddler. Twiddler is something that can adjust your rankings after the original rankings happen. So it's an idea of what's called re-ranking, right? So let's say you get your 100 results, and then you want to make adjustments based on different things about results. So, as an example, Panda would be considered one of these, or previously, the early version of Panda would have been considered one of these. So NavBoost is the twiddler that's based on click behaviors. So basically what they're doing is they're collecting all click data for like the last 13 months and then using that to inform whether or not a page should continue to rank in the position that it ranks in. And so as far as what you do with it, I mean, it's everything that we're talking about around clicks. This is the system that makes those adjustments based on those clicks.
Okay, love it. And what is something that people can like do tomorrow? Let's say somebody who doesn't know anything about the leaks has watched us and has heard you tonight. What's something that they can do tomorrow that immediately they can start to look at?
Yeah, I would say look at your GFC and then pull, your click-through rates, number of clicks and all that, and then line that up with what's being shown on a keyword landing page level in the snippet. So what I mean by that is your page title. What are they showing for a meta description? Because that's going to be different per keyword, right? Like, because in most cases, Google's rewriting your meta description anyway. And so despite the fact that you may have one, set for a given page, different queries for that same page will have a different snippet. So you're going to want to look at that side by side with the actual performance. And in cases where you're seeing like performance is way lower, then you're going to want to think about, how do I adjust this copy so that it's more conducive to people clicking on these pages? And then also align that with your analytics measures as well. So looking at your time on page, your time on site, your page depth. So how many pages do they actually look at when they come to Google or come from Google to the site after they landed on this landing page? And all of those, and also your bounce rate, things like that. Put all that together and then see where the outliers are. Like, where are the ones that are performing really well, and then where are the ones that are performing really bad. And then the ones that are performing really bad are going to be the ones that you're going to want to test out and optimize around so you can make adjustments and make things perform better so that the measures in NavBoost will go up, and then you are reinforcing better rankings for those pages.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm conscious that I've got you for like another 10 minutes and there's a couple other things that I want to touch base with you on. I hate myself for saying touch base because that's a shitty marketing phrase. I'll try and edit that out. But, okay, let's move on. Oh, God. I wasn't blue sky thinking, we're not going to go down this route. But no, listen, okay, let's talk about brand. Okay, so the document seemed to indicate that, brand, there should be an emphasis on brand. If there's somebody listening or watching us now who's like very deep in the SEO weeds, what should they be doing about their brand?
Yeah, I love this question. I am actually writing a blog post right now talking about how search is a branding channel. And because there is just like a big disconnect, being that we're performance marketers technically, if you're an SEO, that you may not understand what is meant by brand, right? Like, brand is such a ambiguous term. If you ask, 5 different brand marketers to define it for you, you get, 5 different answers. So, yeah, it really does come down to, if you build a brand, a lot of these signals that Google is looking for will be automatically covered. And when you think about click behavior, links, content, relevance, and so on, all of that is going to work better for a brand because people are naturally going to click on brands that they recognize. Brands are naturally going to get links. Brands can afford to invest to make highly relevant content, for search. And so building a brand is incredibly valuable because you create more of those signals, right? Like, you are doing things where your entity is mentioned more across the web. And so that is something that, filters back into users as well. So when you think about what NavBoost is doing, one of the things that it can do is associate entities with keywords. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say I search for basketball sneakers. And then I don't like what I found for basketball sneakers, but my next query is Nike basketball sneakers. Well, now that brand is now associated with basketball sneakers inherently, even when someone doesn't search for Nike basketball sneakers, because so many other people are doing that same series of searches. And so within Google's ecosystem, they're able to associate your brand with a variety of things, in the same way that they also look to localize every query, even if it's not really local, right? Like when you search for like plumber or whatever, it inherently is going to expand that query and do like New York plumber, or add entities that are typically related to plumber for someone in New York. And so your brand supports a lot of this, because Google is ultimately collecting all this information across the web to see, okay, what brands are most salient, prevalent, and so on, and then applying that to a variety of things in the background. And the way that you create this is doing things that people typically do for brand building, right? Like, you know, getting the PR, doing things that aren't necessarily about like driving performance, but associating your brand with something else, right? When you think about, the Super Bowl as an example, certain brands are associated with the Super Bowl because they always advertise the Super Bowl. And so to that end, Google is already making the connections between Budweiser in the Super Bowl, or Doritos in the Super Bowl, or Pepsi in the Super Bowl, because those things are often mentioned together in content across the web. So I say all that to say that in SEO, we think of brand as this like amorphous thing, but Google is effectively quantifying brand by using a lot of these different signals. And it's our job to populate our brands through those signals.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that. You were taking a lot of things in my brain there. One of them certainly was, look, this is great. If I'm an established brand with a presence and authority, this is all stuff that I can do. But one of my final questions for you is that, look, if I'm a new website owner or a small business, I'm not going to be looking upon this information fondly, so to speak. So what could a new website owner or a small business, I class them as the same because they're small in size, what can they do to, I was going to say get into the game, but how can they stay in the game if you're new or small?
Yeah, I think it's really leveraging the power of other websites and other brands. So doing a lot of co-branding efforts, getting the PR, getting the news coverage, things like that. That's going to associate you with the other brands in your space, right? So as an example, let's say you're a new shoe brand and you're trying to get in the same space as Nike and Under Armour and Adidas and all that. Well, if you end up being mentioned with those entities, you then get associated in those same, levels of understanding across Google. So if they see 100 times that, or they see 99 times that your brand is mentioned with these 4 other brands, that 100th time, they're going to assume that you are inherently mentioned because you're mentioned in all these other places. So it's really just like, frankly, doing the marketing to get the brand presence that's similar to other brands by leveraging existing brands.
Amazing. I definitely wanted to shoehorn that in before the end. I've got 2 more for you, then okay. we can part ways. Let's fast forward 12 months, 14th of August 2025. What do you expect, if anything, to have changed in the industry?
Generative AI is going to take a much bigger foothold. I think that the SEO space is just so far behind what Google is doing, because like there's 2 distinct models of search at play. There's what's called the lexical model, which is basically counting words and their distributions, and then there's semantic models where it's like understanding meaning. And so generative AI is built on the semantic model, but like most of our SEO tools are still operating on the lexical model. Now that we have vector embeddings that are like easy and cheap to generate, every tool should have the capabilities of semantic analysis. And I anticipate that the SEO space will start to catch up over this next year. But at the same time, the AI native tools are going to do a lot more to impact our space and the ability to generate content and the ability to do analysis faster and things like that. So I think that there's going to be a lot of automation that comes into our space in the next 12 months. And, the day-to-day of what we're doing is going to change dramatically. And then also the capabilities of the search engines are going to change dramatically. And the number of places where people are getting their information needs met is going to change as well. Because we've already got ChatGPT, we've got Perplexity, people are using TikTok as a search engine, Google's under fire, they might get broken up, like all these things are at play. So I anticipate the landscape is just going to be different on all sides significantly over the next 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our mutual friend Ross Simmons has been talking a lot about sort of distribution and everything else across multiple channels. I'm seeing that people are starting to take notice of that now. I mean, he's been talking about that stuff for years, but I'm starting to see it now more and more as a result. People are actually like, this is most of it is rented land, and if we all in one space, we're pretty much stuffed. But that's a conversation for another day. Before you leave and you share your details for you, firstly, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed having this chat with you and exploring the more technical side of your brain as well as some of the fun parts. We're going to leave on a fun note. Okay, so it's no secret you're a man of many talents, rapper, marketer, father. That's the one thing that I wanted to sort of pick your brains on. So I'm fairly certain you've never been asked this question on a podcast before, but try and make the answer funny, please. I need this to be funny. In what way would you say that SEO and fatherhood are alike?
Nobody listens to me.
10 points. 10 points. That's fantastic. That's going to be the trailer for the show now. No, I've really enjoyed this. Before you go, please do. I mean, most people are connected with you anyway, but for those that are not and want to reach out to you, where can they find you, follow you? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm iPullRank. That's where I write most of my stuff. I'm at iPullRank on all the social networks. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Mike at iPullRank.com if you want to email me.
Yeah, amazing. You definitely should connect with him if you're not already, even if it's just to say thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Really appreciate it. It's been great to hang out. I always end the show and say something daft like, please do like, rate, share and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. And my one silly thing to end today's episode is the next time you're out getting groceries, before you pay, say, hey, I heard this great marketing podcast with Azeem and Mike King. The person that you're talking to might not even be into marketing, but the fact that you've told one more person will make this podcast slightly better. So do that, because a friend in need is a friend of Azeem. And that was awful.
I loved it. I loved every second of it.
But yeah, look, we'll catch you on the next episode. As always, please like, rate, share and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.